Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Cove Podcast. I'm Captain Todd Lemper, your regular host. Today's episode, the topic is going to be leadership. Not so much in lofty concepts or sort of academics trying to compartmentalise these amazing models and stuff, but we're going to talk about real world stuff at a tactical scenario. My guest today is COL John Papalitsas. He's an infantry officer, served with 3RR, cut his teeth in the infantry in 3RR, and then went on to become the commanding officer of the Northwest Mobile Force, and then subsequently was the first commander of the Regional Force Surveillance Group, or RFSG, which is the higher headquarters for 51 Far North Queensland, the Pilbara Regiment, and the Northwest Mobile Force. We talked about RFSG in its history, I suppose, in the Tiwi Islands, sir, when we talked about coast watchers identifying their aircraft flying down into Darwin. I suppose just before I do say welcome to the episode and talk about your current your job, I suppose what was it like taking over command straight away of RFSG with that history behind it?
Oh, look, probably the almost the highlight of my career, I'd say. It was a phenomenal opportunity to be provided. And you are very well aware when you're up there of the enormity of the history that you are dealing with. And as you say, there's lineage there through the Torres Strait Light Infantry Battalion into the 51st Battalion, the Far North Queensland Regiment. And with Norforce, the lineage back to World War II. So the 2nd 1st Northern Australia Observer Unit, often called the Knackaroos or Curtin's Cowboys. And Norforce still wear the same colour patch today that the Knackaroos wore as part of the 2nd AIF. And then also the Northern Territory Special Reconnaissance Unit. Both of those units, interestingly enough, run by anthropologists. So a fellow by the name of Stanner, who took over Norforce, that was an expert in what they then called native affairs, and he was an anthropologist. And another guy, Squadron Leader Donald Thompson, who was a RAF anthropologist that ran the Northern Territory Special Reconnaissance Unit that isn't as well known, that was 50 Yolngu warriors that worked in Arnhem Land, spotting for the Japanese. It just looked like they were native Australians out in that area, but were reporting back on any potential Japanese movement. So you really did feel that history, and that was really wound in together to form the Northwest Mobile Force on the 1st of July 1981. So it was the next evolution of something very, very special in our history, and a privilege I will carry with me for the remainder of my days, having been able to do that job.
That's absolutely awesome. It's such an awesome spot up there as well, across the whole of the top of Australia. COL Papalitsas is now the Director of Leadership and Futures at the Land Combat College, which used to be RMCA, but it's called the Land Combat College, and had a bit of a restructure and stuff. I think we need to do another episode on that as well. But welcome to the episode, sir.
Hey, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. It's a privilege to be able to come in for a chat and tell a story.
Awesome. So I suppose that story component is important because you've had time to reflect. This has been a common thread across all the episodes, is you've had time to reflect on your experience thus far. Now, specific to this episode and is your deployment to East Timor as a platoon commander straight out of RMC, but I don't want to go straight into that. I want to come back a little bit and I want to talk about your sort of the formative experience of training prior to deploying. At the time, you would not have known that you were going to East Timor. And I suppose my question is, how hard was it or difficult was it for RMC to sort of, express the risk of deployment or like what you were going out into the battalions to do?
So they were very different days, and it was a very different army. So I started at the Defence Force Academy in January of 1995, and we were a completely different Defence Force, not just for capability, but for strategic circumstance and the reality of what had sort of gone on. So the army had not seen large-scale deployment since Vietnam, less the 1RR battalion group in Somalia, and then obviously 2RR and associated elements in Rwanda, but nothing large-scale. And when we went through our training, much of what we did was based around, we still had Vietnam veterans in Army, and we were trained by Vietnam veterans, and we still had an element where we focused on their lessons, and certainly jungle training was woven into what we did. I remember as a third-year advocate being taken to Canungra when Battle Wing was still there and doing exercise Hydra, and I can tell you we were not prepared for that, but it was a seminal learning experience.
Yeah.
And then at RMC, it really was, when we talked about contemporary operations, there was a bit about Somalia, and there had been some Somalia vets that had then come through or were on staff. You then had people that had been to Rwanda. And then we had some Brit exchange staff that had been in the first Gulf War. So really that was the operational lens through which examples were given to us, and everything else was historical, obviously out of doctrine, etc. But there weren't, at our level, at junior level, there weren't threat warnings and indicators that were obvious to us. So, I often say to people, I recall sitting with a mate of mine who's now brigadier, in the mess at ADFIST, looking at the wall in the mess where there was an AKM that had been captured in Somalia. And we said, hey, how lucky were those guys? They walked out of training as commissioned officers, and they subsequently deployed directly on operations, having no idea that a couple of years later that would be us. So there wasn't that imperative at that time. It wasn't, when I graduated in December of 98, I hadn't seen, certainly at my level, nor had my peers seen something where you'd say, well, that's on the event horizon. And it wasn't until in the immediate months prior to the deployment that you had any idea that something was changing, sort of as events on the world stage shifted. There was the referendum in Timor, and then you had the security situation disintegrate over there. It wasn't until late in the piece that we sort of had those warnings and indicators. So everything we were being taught was out of history. We were told you had to be ready. The Army certainly had a very strong readiness culture. And I was fortunate enough to be selected to go to the infantry, which is where I wanted to go, and then to 3RAR, which was a parachute battalion at the time. So there was a strong readiness culture in that unit due to its role and its notice to move. So that's what we sort of lent on, rather than specifics about the
where
circumstance until really late in the piece. And it came quickly, as we've previously discussed.
Yeah. So you wanted infantry, really wanted to go to 3RAR.
Yep.
How did you get that? I suppose the itch to go to 3RAR. Well, why 3RAR?
So what I really wanted to do, I figured if I was going to join the Army, I wanted to join the Army all the way. So I wanted to be an infantry officer. That was something that was pretty solid with me from very early on. In second year at ADFA, we used to do a motivational attachment, and I was really lucky that academically I was tracking okay. So I got a 2-week attachment, and I put my hand up to go to 3RAR because I'd heard these stories about this unit. I understood that the role meant that they might have to go forward and operate on their own for a period of time, and I figured, hey, what a challenge! And I would love to cut my teeth there and see if I can lead in that environment. If I can lead there, I reckon that's a pretty good combat indicator that you'll be okay in your Army career. The other thing for me was, I had and have a fear of heights. So I thought to myself, well, one way to get over that is probably to get parachute qualified. I can assure you that I just jumped scared, but I did learn some lessons about self through that journey.
Never fixed it. Yeah, you just
I didn't. Yeah. I didn't. I would contest with the parachute training school. They got a great motto: knowledge dispels fear. It didn't dispel it, but I certainly had to learn how to control it. It was a challenging couple of weeks for me at PDS, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I suppose back to RMC. You've gone through RMC. It's difficult to talk about a specific threat. There are no key indicators that anything is going to happen, but you march into the unit you wanted and that you got into 3RAR, expecting, I imagine, large exercises in Australian training areas for a significant amount of time and getting upskilled with no threat of actually deploying on the horizon. What actually happens when you get to 3RAR?
Yeah, so look, the thing we were very clear on is your role and your notice to move, and the fact that a company was online to go inside hours if it needed to. So you worked towards that and towards being ready. And when you first got there, you needed to get your ROBC done, obviously. So the first thing was to get that ticked off, and then you needed to go, officer basic course, and then you needed to go and do your basic parachute course. So we went to the regimental officers basic course at Singleton first, and back then it was only 4 weeks for infantry, 2 weeks of range quals, 2 weeks of some refresher, if you like, on tactics. I don't know that we learned anything that was too new, and we were still going through that operations in defence of Australia phase there. And then you came back to the unit, and then we went on our basic parachute course, not far shy of Anzac Day. And so you weren't allocated a platoon generally before you were parachute qualified, because if we had to deploy by parachute, you couldn't go with them. So you'd sort of be held off in the training company at that period of time until you were qualified. Then as the slot opened up, you'd be slid in as a platoon commander. And I recall at that stage, as you say, large-scale exercises. We deployed on Swift Canopy 99, which was the Battalion X, and myself and one of the other new lieutenants that were there at the time, we were in the command post as duty officers. So you were doing that on-the-job training, on-the-job experience to learn how the battalion worked, how it rallied on a drop zone, what the roles and tasks were. So that was a good learning experience. Now, interestingly enough, with the benefit of hindsight, you could see that the CO, Lieutenant Colonel Nick Welsh at the time, clearly had been given a warning order about the potential of something happening, because he ran a section competition at the end of Swift Canopy, which was focused on some of those lower level, if you like, security tasks around vital asset protection, around vehicle checkpoints, around cordon and search techniques. And at the time, we found it odd. So we deployed on Swift Canopy. It was a warfighting exercise, and then we switched to doing this stuff for the section competition for the OP trophy. And you looked at it now and you said, yeah, he had a warning order.
It was all deliberate.
So he must have, he deliberately looked at it and said, what other things might we need to know? So coming into the middle of that year, that's what we did. And again, I look at it now, with the benefit of hindsight as a senior officer, and I say that's a masterstroke, because in July of that year, I recall we got to work, and Bravo Company 3 Hour Online is the online parachute company group. They'd come in to do PT, and I was in Charlie Company, so the company next door, and all of a sudden you see this whole bunch of noise and sound, and they're flashing off to get their gear and get their DP1. So get out a PT kit, grab your DP1, bring all your gear on the parade ground. And this was pretty normal at 3 Hour, right? So you'd have test exercises all the time. You get recalled at night when you're online. You'd go through all of this stuff. You'd be bussed out to RAF Richmond, get into parachutes, hop in the aircraft, jump somewhere, and it was part of an operational readiness test. So we just assumed initially that's what it was. It wasn't. They'd received a warning order that something was going on with regard to East Timor, and subsequently history will show that the SASR, as I understand it, were there to facilitate a service-protected evacuation if required. So they had gone to Tyndall to get ready, and Bravo Company was sent to support them. So they arrived at work to do PT. By that afternoon, they were in RAF Tyndall. They didn't come home for 9 months. So they went forward. They stayed forward. Then as the situation got more granular and we got a warning order as a battalion, we were all put on notice. And then I recall getting the phone call at home saying, come in, it's time. And then in September of 99, probably around, if I'm working back, because we deployed on the 20th, probably about sort of maybe the 15th or 16th, we get told, hey, it's time. And then we pretty rapidly moved to Darwin, and we joined Bravo Company up there. And I remember their family was sort of brought up to spend some time with them because they'd already been away a few months, and we consolidated as a battalion and then got ready to deploy with the International Force East Timor. It all happened very quickly.
Yeah. And I suppose how I think we just talked about a funny story about your deployment, but the modes of transport, I think there was a bit of a...
Yeah, so, look, and anyone that's been in the Army for a period of time, you've got to, one, stay loose in the saddle, get used to that whole great coats on, great coats off, but strange things will happen. So, I mean, for me, there was the way that this all rolled out. So I think I was saying to you earlier, we had just received the Ninox night fighting equipment. So I was one of 2 officers that did the train the trainer course, and we trained the battalion up. Again, like serendipitous for timing, because we actually had Gen 3 night fighting equipment when we needed it, right? Immediately after that, the CO said to me, congratulations, once you've done doing this training, we're going to give you a platoon in Charlie Company. So I ended up a platoon commander, 9 platoon Charlie Company. I'd only been a platoon commander for 2 weeks when the balloon went up for East Timor. I hadn't even been in the close training area. Right, we hadn't even patrolled anywhere, done bump drills. We were working that out on the boat. Yeah. So, and I've probably just given a precursor to what went on. So we go to Darwin. We're a parachute battalion, right? So 2 RAR and 1 RAR being part of the operational deployment force out of Townsville, they used to work on amphibious craft all the time with helicopters. So, of course, 2 RAR go in via the C-130 because they're the amphib unit, or linked to that. And we go in via the Jarvis Bay, which was a catamaran that we hired that the Navy were using. So the parachute battalion was on a boat. I mean, that's a very Army thing to do. So,
switch them up,
Yeah, switch it up. Just work it out. Whatever the mode of transport is, off you go.
That's good. So you're sailing over. Everyone's sort of trying to catch up, like trying to be like, okay, now we know the threat is now specific. We've had a little bit of time, although briefly, to prepare and stuff, but you're trying to like get in the mindset. I suppose as soon as you hit Dili, I imagine you infill into Dili. What's the situation on the ground?
We didn't sort of know what the situation was exactly. So we were getting intelligence reports. There were elements forward. We were starting to get feeds. There were some news feeds that they were playing for us so that we could see. But they very openly said to us, I still remember this in battalion orders, this could be anything from marching bands meeting us in the streets through to us being opposed when we land. We don't know, right? And the thing that's not often talked about, so 2 RAR were seeking to fly into Comoro Airfield, and we were told, look, if the airfield's blocked and we can't get C-130s in, you guys may be required to jump and clear the airfield. So I recall there were parachutes in Darwin in case, right? So that was plan B. It didn't come to that, as we know. So we got on the boat and we weren't sure. And I still remember them playing a bunch of movies on the boat. It was really interesting. So they played The Odd Angry Shot was one.
Yeah.
So, trying to get that Australian. And then somebody put Saving Private Ryan on, which probably wasn't a great decision. And a couple of the officers going, I don't know this is the film to be watching. But then as we got closer, they started playing live news feeds on the screen in the boat. And I just remember people being fixated watching.
Trying to get that info.
The situation, the situational awareness. And as we started cruising in, like we went over in the hours of darkness, and we as you could start to see the sun come up and you could start to see the city on the horizon in front of us. I remember them putting snipers and Mag 58s on the front of the boat because I just didn't know. It was a catamaran, right? Civilian catamaran pressed into service.
Yeah.
You just didn't know what was there. And then we sort of pulled into the wharf, and there's just humanity everywhere. Like there's clearly the Indonesian military there who've been there for years and trying to maintain some degree of law and order. There are other civilians, like hundreds and hundreds of them on the wharf. And then we saw there were civilians walking around with carpets on their shoulders with weapons in the middle of it, and we're trying to point it out. And 2RAR had a small detachment that had come down to the wharf because they'd landed via aircraft to try and assist us in getting off the boat. And then all of a sudden, you're just there. It's on. You've got your orders. I remember being in the bowels of the boat and getting that it's time to go. Let's go. Hey, let's go. OC9, move. And then I just sort of you gave the order. All right, action. So everyone went to action, and we walked down the gangway. We'd been given our patrol orders, and I proceeded down the street, off the wharf, out past the university, and towards the cathedral, which was our patrol base. And then it hit you full scale. The heat. I had never seen this scale and level of destruction. Like we were in a major city, a city that would normally have hundreds of thousands of people, and there was almost not a building that was untouched. Things razed to the ground, things on fire. All you could smell was sewage and ash. Like everything was burning, right? It was hot. There was smoke. There was a smell you originally didn't identify, and then you worked out that was bodies, right? And so the sights, the sounds, the smells are overwhelming. And then as you start patrolling, we start to see our first militia, and there's complexities around where they are, where Indonesian security forces are, how we're trying to deal with that situation and trying to find our way to the patrol base. So that first patrol, it's almost like it was happening to you, like you weren't in that moment as you're trying to take all of this in, and then remembering, hey, you got to wheel and deal these soldiers. Oh, and P.S., we'd never been in the close training area, so I was talking bump drills on the boat with my section commanders because I had the L plates on, right? But it's real now. So that was quite amazing. Sort of trying to take stock on your way through and get to where you need to go and clear that area where you're going to stage out of.
Yeah, and so you set up at the cathedral as your patrol base there, and then subsequently sort of somewhat bed in, but I suppose the general vibe for all of the episodes we've done for any deployments is that you want to get a lay of the land and sort of get your nav points, get out there, and like you said, get out with your platoon and start doing some drills. I suppose, when does the first large tactical task come, and sort of what is it inside Dili itself?
Oh, look, straight up. So off the boat. So our first job is, so it was, INTERFET, as you'd understand, was a Chapter 7 peace enforcement operation. So there wasn't a peace to keep, so to speak. So our first job was to get control of the security situation and stop the action of the militia and stop what had been going on with regard to the city being ravaged, with the local populace being targeted. And so we were trying to get control of that. So straight off the boat, the tactical task begins, because you're literally clearing your way there, trying to get the lay of the land, understanding where the Indonesian military are, where we'll be operating. Because at that point in time, obviously, there's great tension between Australia coming in to head up this international force, the Indonesians still being there but pulling out because the Timorese had voted for independence in the referendum. So there's a degree of tension and complexity in the political situation. The militia who'd acted illegally and was trying to support the previous regime, though the Timorese had voted for independence, and clearly they'd targeted the locals, which was the reason that we had been put in there. So really initially it was about security taskings, getting out and trying to make the streets safe so the population could come back, because they'd gone into the hills. So I'd never seen a city that hundreds of thousands of people, and there just weren't people there. So the first task was really get to that patrol base, establish a degree of local security, start to try and own the streets day and night. And the security situation was not good. So we were patrolling as a platoon by day initially, and then as half platoon bricks by night, because you had to rest. You're getting into a cycle, so you couldn't just keep people up the whole time. And what would happen is at night, the platoon sergeant and I would carve the night and decide who went out, sort of before 2 or 3 a.m. and who went out afterwards. And then we'd go on patrol with half of the platoon. And again, which is difficult because it's not it's not a fixed element. It's not, 2 sections. It's a section and a brick so that you can kind of work your way through giving people some rest. So that's sort of how we started. And then we secured Dili Stadium so that we could get the internally displaced persons, the IDPs, back into Dili by trying to provide them an area that was safe where we could do food distribution, where Médecins Sans Frontières could come in and provide some medical aid, etc. But we had to control the security situation to convince people it was okay to come out. So we were trying to work towards that. So it's all security related initially and dealing with the immediate threat.
Yeah. And then you sort of get indications that something's happened at a hotel and that you then tasked to go forward and sort of investigate it, I suppose. What happens when you go through that?
Yeah, so pretty early on in the piece, inside the first couple of weeks, as I recall, the platoon was rotated on as the Battalion Quick Reaction Force, so the QRF for the battalion. And as it happened that day, there was a military camera team that had come over from the Public Relations Service, and they were attached to me for the day, so they spent the day with me. And look, it was a learning experience, quite literally, right? So I'm learning as a new platoon commander. That team had been formed. It had already been in Malaysia. They'd been at Butterworth for a period of time. So initially the one new guy, it was me and 1 or 2 other soldiers. So I'm going through the process of trying to integrate with people that are already there. And then when we got over there, as I said, the parachute battalion takes the boat, and then we get joined up with 2nd Cavalry Regiment, who were div reconnaissance that never carried infantry in labs. We'd never seen a lab. We're in Holsworthy. So we're working at drills to use labs like armoured personnel carriers. So it was all very new, and we were dealing with it on the move. So when you were the QRF, you were mounted in labs. So we had basically a lav PC per section and a gun car for the platoon headquarters that gave us obviously that 25mm Bushmaster cannon as well. So we were QRF, and first thing in the morning we were reacted immediately to a rice distribution that was actually being run by one of our other platoons. And what had happened was they'd gone to a warehouse, they were assisting in distributing rice to the locals, and we got reports that the militia were waiting a couple of blocks away to then intercept the locals, take the rice, and then intimidate or hurt the local population. So we were told to get there and form a perimeter and stop that from occurring. So we reacted to that task and we started dealing with that. And I recall that was really positive because it was the first tangible thing I felt that we'd done to help the Timorese people, really. Like, we'd established a degree of security, but this actually was us assisting in food being distributed to people that were hungry. So that was really satisfying to be a part of that, but just try and get out and control that security situation and push the militia out and deal with them. So certainly we arrived with labs and set up a perimeter. And so, obviously people make themselves scarce at that point in time. And we got to a point in that distribution where Battalion got a hold of me in the CP and indicated that there were reports of militia burning buildings and firing shots in another part of town. So we were reacted to go and deal with that. And as we moved into that area, there were militia in that area, and they engaged as we got out of the labs. So we were in contact at that point in time, and we tried to sort of get up to where they were. We spotted they were in a building that was actually partially on fire. But there were a lot of media in Dili at this time, some accredited press, but a whole bunch of freelance journalists. And it was my first exposure to freelance journalists and the sort of risk that they are willing to take to get the story. And they are literally in and amongst my lead section whilst we're being shot at and trying to get into this building. And I still remember there was a British LO trying to control the media, and he says in a very stiff, British voice, "Platoon Commander, would you like some assistance with the media?" And I said, "Sir, that'd be great. I really don't want to get a soldier killed because they're in the way, nor do I want them hurt." Because they had no regard for their own safety. They were in trying to get a shot whilst we were being shot at and trying to deal with it. So we cleared through the buildings. The militia didn't stay around to be decisively engaged. And so we did that task. Reported back after we cleared them. Obviously, we've got no way to deal with the fire, but we were the security services, the fire brigade, the ambulance service. Like, we were everything at this time. But then I remember going back to the gun car and receiving a really fateful call. So I got a call out of the CP that indicated that there were reports that the Hotel Tropical had been vacated. So the Tropical was listed as the headquarters for the militia that had been working Dili. It was initially inside the Indonesian-controlled section of town. So, the militia had a firm base in an area where they weren't concerned about us being because it was demarcated. But at this point, with the Indonesian military pulling back, they'd moved from this part of town, and therefore, it would appear the militia had then moved out of this hotel. Now, what was significant about this was all the intelligence reporting indicated that the Tropical had been used as a staging base, but that also There were reports that that they'd actually tortured and murdered people in the back of the hotel, and that there was a well in the back of the hotel that potentially had been utilised to dispose of those persons that had been killed in that area. And this was briefed on several occasions with regard to the intelligence picture. So when the task came through, and it's on the speaker box in the back of the car so all the soldiers can hear it, you could just see the looks on faces because everyone knows this is a reported murder scene, and the reports weren't good. So we were well aware that we were going into a bad part of town where people had been killed, and we weren't quite sure what we would find. So we had a quick discussion with the Platoon Commander, and we came up with a plan, and then we rolled down into that part of town, obviously being very careful, dismounted short of the hotel and then cleared our way to it, being very careful. We just didn't know what we'd find there. So it was pretty quiet other than when the locals realised we were there. They trailed in behind us because clearly they knew the stories too, right? So they wanted to see. So they sort of kept a safe distance behind us, but then we were really careful about we don't know what's ahead of us. We don't know if there are still militia. We don't know if they've left any booby traps, whatever else, because it had been their headquarters. And then you got locals moving around in the undergrowth, etc. So you don't want to get jumpy about discharging around either, right? So I recall pushing up, getting my lead section commander to go in and trying to push in a perimeter, clear through the yard, clear through the hotel, secure that perimeter, and then try and identify where this well was, because we didn't have any. Well, certainly I didn't have access to any imagery or anything else at that point in time. And the labs were outside with one of the other sections providing security out towards the road and ready to react if they needed to. And I still recall the section commander who was forward was a fellow by the name of Corporal Nigel Bryan. His nickname was Weaponhead. There'd be people out there in Army that remember him well. He was a larger-than-life individual. He was a really big fellow. I mean, when this guy carried a star, it looked like a 9mm in his hands. Like he was an enormous human being. And, tough reputation. He'd come from one RAR and he was, there was fact behind it too. And I still remember he was the lead call sign. And he pushed in. They started clearing. I was filling in behind him to lock off the perimeter. And I knew he'd found something because he was walking back to me slowly and the colour had completely drained from his face. He looked translucent by the time he got to me. And he just looked me straight in the face and he said, "It's up there. There's definitely dead people. I'm not going near it." Now, that comment out of this bloke, who was as hard as nails, that sort of gave me the first indication that whatever was up there was challenging. And I recall, because I had PHQ with me and then I've obviously got one of the sections just adjacent, those soldiers heard that and looking at one of the machine gunners who turned 19, the LSW gunner on the boat, then a fellow by the name of Private McDonough, just the look on his face.
And he's looking up at you. Like,
he's looking straight at me.
Yeah.
Sig's looking straight at me. Section commander's looking at me, and I've been a platoon commander for about 2 weeks, right? So what was ringing in my ears was something that I actually, in that moment, had heard in Badco Hall during a presentation from a Vietnam veteran at RMC while I was a cadet. And I still recall this officer saying, "Hey, one of the most important lessons I learned is never ask a soldier to do anything you wouldn't do yourself, because they'll know. Leadership's all about example. And if you're willing to do it, they'll be willing to follow." So I recall saying to Corporal Bryan, I just said, "Hey, got it, mate. No worries. You go back to your section, make sure you secure that perimeter. I'll take care of this." So I walked up to do the ID.
And then, so obviously, I won't talk in great detail about what you saw when you walked up there, but like you've gone forward. Everyone else is looking at you, being like, "What are we doing here, boss?" Gone forward, identified what was the case at the back of this hotel, and then subsequently, I imagine a radio transmission transpired.
Yeah.
Reporting exactly what you had seen.
Yeah, so I moved forward. I couldn't see it initially, but then as I came around the corner, you could see where the well was. It was pretty prominent where it had been. And sort of as I approached it, as I said to you previously, the sights, the sounds, the smells that you're faced with. But as I got closer to the well, by that stage you worked out what death smelt like, right? And it was overwhelming. So I within, metres of it, so once I'm 10, 15 metres away, you know. And I could see just the evidence around that people, There were some scenes there that don't leave you. There were some scenes there where it was quite clear that people were bound, that people were likely tortured and killed in that area, and then that they were disposed of. So I got to the well and then you could see, there was definitely evidence that people had been placed into the well. So I went back to my radio operator to then report back to battalion to indicate that we'd secured the perimeter and that yes, that in my assessment it was a crime scene. So I was sort of trying to gather myself because it was very confronting from a sensory perspective, visually, the way it smelt, the sights and sounds that you were dealing with, trying to process in your mind what human beings had done to other human beings and make sense of it, noting that you've got a job to do, so you just can't afford to be overwhelmed, but you're trying to deal with all this and not be sick, and then walk back and call battalion. So I got back a hold of Zero Alpha and I indicated that we've secured the perimeter, we've found the well. The evidence that I can see would indicate that there are deceased persons in the well, and that we're going to need obviously police and a recovery team to deal with exhuming what's there and secure the perimeter because it's a crime scene. And I recall, I don't know who the duty officer was, but I recall the duty officer just pushing for information and consistently asking me to give a body count, like how many people in the well. And I kept going back and saying, I don't know. And I kept getting that, well, you've looked. I said, yeah, I don't know. The state that things are in, I can't readily identify numbers of people, noting the state of what I am facing in that well. And it just kept going backwards and forwards, and I've just come from this scene and I'm overwhelmed by the sight and the sound and the thinking about it, and it gets to a point where I actually swore on the radio, which I didn't mean to do, but I was being quite pointed about what do you not understand about its components. It's not whole people. I don't know what to tell you. I am not sure how many people are in there. But what's not clear about this? Now, what wasn't going through my head as that was happening and I was just speaking without probably the filter that I needed was when you're the QRF, you're on battalion command. So this is now booming into the CP.
Yeah.
It's booming into every company headquarters, every attachment, the Gurkhas that are with us, whether or not it was going to brigade. And then the enormity of, I just swore on the battalion command net. As I sat there and there was silence. And then all of a sudden I hear the radio press will go down. And I remember this like it was yesterday.
The time between the click of the press to talk and then subsequently someone talking would have felt like
forever. Felt like forever, right? Yep. So the world went into slow-mo and I get exactly what I probably didn't want, which was Sunray 3-3, this is Niner, over. And I thought, how can this day get worse?
Yeah.
Well, the CO just heard that
Yeah.
on the speaker box in the CP. And he was brilliant. If you wanted an example for how you lead, like he clearly in that moment, you could just feel that he had empathy. He could visualise what was going on out there and what I was trying to describe. And he just came in over the top. And I still recall him saying, hey, Sunray 3-3, this is Niner. I act your report. I'll fix the issues at this end. Good job to you and your team. I will get the UN police and a recovery team to your location. And then he said, acknowledge, and I acknowledged. And then he broke with protocol in the way that he spoke. I still remember him saying, son, I'm going to send the media. You need to tell the world what you've seen here. It's really important they understand what's happened. So just get yourself ready. They'll be there pretty quickly. You need to tell the story. Good work to you and your lads. I'm proud of you. Out. And meant the world. So I saw him for the first time in 25 years at the reunion last September. And, we recounted that story and he remembered it like I did. And I said, hey, thanks for not tearing my head off for swearing. And he just laughed and gave me a hug, which was great. So I think, he had that ability as a commander to have empathy with what was going on forward and the fact that, hey, all I was trying to do was let them know what was going on. And I couldn't give them what they wanted. And I just needed some assistance at that point in time. So the media was super quick. I was very fortunate in that I had that camera team with me and I had a public relations warrant officer with me who was able to say, hey, sir, I heard what your CO said. They're going to arrive. There'll be a pack of them. This will be a huge story for them. Here's what you need to do. Just let's work up some really quick messages about what you found. Look down the camera, tell the story. Let's indicate to them just factually, this is what it is. This is what we think's happened. It's a crime scene. This is what we're doing. And that was just worth its weight in gold. And I tell you what, he wasn't wrong. They were quicker than a QRF. Like they were there in 10 minutes flat.
Quicker than police.
They were quicker than the police and the recovery team certainly. But the police were there not long after because we needed to secure the perimeter. So they sent a call sign to secure the perimeter. They got the police there. but I had to deal with the media throng, and there were I didn't take a head count clearly, but 35, 40
circus.
It was a media circus comparatively. And in those days, I mean, you're a junior lieutenant. Media training. I mean, we did that on pre-command as a lieutenant colonel going to a unit. You didn't do it as a lieutenant. So I was so fortunate to have the public relations crew there with me, and I didn't know at the time because comms aren't what they are today, but the footage they got on that day was cut and shut and sent back to Australia, and it ended up on A Current Affair, as it was, spliced in to tell some of these stories. And I subsequently watched it, and you can just see the difference in my persona and my face from the food distribution to the end of the day when I've just come back from that well, and the way I look and the way I'm speaking, and you can see the impact that day has had on not only me but my soldiers. Because it was an emotional and physical toll given everything that happened on that day. And I recall being asked by the camera team, and then A Current Affair used it, what's the toughest thing you've seen today? And well, clearly I couldn't describe everything in detail at the well. It wouldn't have been appropriate. But I also recall we were patrolling in the vehicles later that day as we left the well, and we actually went past what would have been a school or a childcare centre, and it had been razed to the ground. And there were still caricatures you could see on the wall, so Donald Duck, Mickey Mouse, Minnie, etc., singed, broken toys, blood on the walls. And I recall saying, it was what you could see, there were broken toys and broken dreams. It was just a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
So I recall getting back to the stadium and my boss saying, hey, battalion's on the line, they need to react you. And then he sort of took one look at me in the platoon and he goes, are you guys okay? And we'd probably been on, 14, 16 hours of straight, tasking that day in body armour in 38-degree temperatures, having seen what we've seen. We were not okay. So he said, hey, I'll go back to the CO. I don't think this is urgent. I think you guys need to stop. And I probably worked out that I'd had about enough because I had after the soldiers were sorted out, and I said, yeah, just let them rest for a bit, refit, let's get water. We don't know if we'll get called out. Anything could happen. You're not in charge when you're the QRF, right, as you know. And so the medic came over and said, you okay? You look a bit drawn, sir. Have you had some water? I said, yeah, I've worked through most of it. He goes, tell you what, how about I just throw a cannula in you and give you some fluid. While you sit here, you'll feel better about it. So he stuck a line in my arm, and I sat there and thought about the day. And, it was, I don't know how long I sat there for in the stands at Dili Stadium, just thinking about what the heck had gone on and how you reconcile that as a human being. Yeah. Like how do humans do that to other humans? I don't know. But again, you didn't have too long to think about it because what's the next task? So let's get some water. Let's make sure we're right. Does anyone need anything? And let's be ready.
I suppose what's the next task is the just sort of flavour of the entire episode. But so you move from a rice distribution to a task that you then subsequently see the back of this hotel in absolute, like a massacre. And then you move to handing a media, and then you hand over to police. So you're doing something, and then you move back to the stadium to rest and recover. Now, if we go from Dili, and then we're trying to now push out, you talked about the Indonesians pushing off Dili and returning back over. Yep. If we go out to now, you subsequently, I'm going to fast forward a little bit, but you get deployed to Maliana.
That's correct.
And then subsequently get enacted again to do a different task. Can we talk about getting up closer to the border?
Yeah, so the whole plan here was the way that it worked out, and I know recently General Cosgrove and the former Prime Minister John Howard have spoken about the plan and the way that it worked at larger levels, but you could see we were ink spotting, so into Dili, secure that area, and then start pushing further out as we can resolve the security situation. So we flew in Black Hawks out to Maliana, which was out in one of the district capitals, and I know every battalion had a different task and went to a different place, but that was ours. And our company got pushed out that way, and I was actually the lead call sign. So I flew in first. There was an SASR patrol on the ground at the time. We did a handover. I actually, some of the members of that patrol had been on my basic parachute course, so it's a small army. Always deal well with people. You never know where you'll meet them. And then we started clearing that part of the town to receive the remainder of the company headquarters. And as it happens, there'd been, there'd been some sort of massacre in Maliana in the basketball stadium there as well. But the bodies had gone, but the evidence was clearly still there, and we needed to sweep through. We found a whole bunch of weapons caches that first 24 hours, just tried to clean that out, small arms, high explosive, other bits and pieces that were around. And then we started the same sort of thing, but in a more rural setting. So we got to a smaller township that was a local node. It was a more regional setting. Again, it had been razed to the ground. The one house that was in one piece was the mayoral house. It tended to be the case everywhere. And so CHQ set up in there, and we started doing taskings around that area. While we were there, the company became the Brigade Quick Reaction Force. and where we reacted. So there had been reports that a township up near the border that was referred to as Bellaluk-Laten, now on the map you'll see it's marked as Fatuman, but there's some references to Bellaluk-Laten forward of that. There was significant militia activity coming into that area. It had been razed to the ground. Locals had been targeted, and they just kept, obviously coming from a secure, firm bases over the other side of the border into this area with impunity because we didn't have security forces there. So the brigade commander, Brigadier Evans at the time, later General Evans, had said, right, we're going to put the brigade QRF out there, and we need you to cordon and search the village and deal with the militia if you find them. So we were put in Black Hawks and flown out to this area in order to undertake a cordon and search. So we're going to land in the high ground, sort of off to one side of the village, and then work our way down. Put in a cordon. One of the platoons puts in a cordon. The other platoon searches. One of the platoons in depth. I'd managed to upset my company commander. It's a skill for a young lieutenant. So I was depth in this case. So we were going to sit this one out. So we were co-located with CHQ, which meant we were the rearwards call sign nearest to the border. But as we came in the Black Hawks, there were a group of militia on a hill inside the East Timorese border. And as we sort of dismounted and got on the ground, they engaged us. So it was at a range of probably 14 to 1,500 metres, but they were firing 7.62 with spotters, and they were landing it in and around us. So I went from being the rear call sign because I wasn't popular to the lead call sign of the contact because I was closest to where it was happening. So very quickly, it didn't quite happen simultaneously, but with the Black Hawks were offset, right? So we landed in different zones as we needed to. So the cordon landed sort of closest to the village so they could get around it, the search behind them, and then we're up in the high ground with CHQ, who are sort of back with us. So all of a sudden, ourselves and CHQ are now in the firing line, and then the guys in the lower ground, with the militia on the high ground, started taking fire as well in the low ground. They started firing back. At this stage, the militia on the hill on their own, probably that we could see there were maybe 10 or 15 of them, spotters and those that were armed and firing and correcting off what was being spotted. So the company commander, we had a quick chat about what we were going to do, and we were sort of short a few options because with the ROE we didn't have mortars, and we'd lost a couple of airframes just that went US before the task lifted off, so we had to lighten a load. So as happens, fatefully, we couldn't get everything in that we wanted, so the OC made the decision not to take the tripods for the sustained fire machine guns. We had a DFSW section with us, and that was pretty fateful because we couldn't just set up a gun line and deal with it that way. I'm a DFSW guy too, so later on I realised just how effective that would have been because they were on the forward slope of a hill. So I said to him, hey, why don't we run the helos back past and use the door guns? And in talking about that, there's obviously risk to the airframe, etc. So it was decided, no, we won't do that. We had light observation helicopters. COL was flying over the top, and in fact, they were being shot at, and when they depressed the pressure, you could hear the rounds going past them. So the company commander said to me, right, you're going to go around the left flank and you're going to clear them. So I need you to pull off the hill, move around. The guys in the low ground will give you fire support. You get them off that hill. So probably about 1,400 metres away. So off we went, pulled off the rear of the hill and then started moving around on the flank. Sort of expediently looked at, being down off the crest and then picking an FUP for us to get up over the top and clear. So that's the task that I next got given. So we're sort of on our way around as this contact is evolving. And I get about halfway around and, as these things happen, there's confusion, right? So I suddenly get a radio call from the OC that says, I need you to come back to my position. And I sought to clarify. Because
you're on the move now.
On the move. We're halfway around to the FUP.
Yeah.
And he goes, get back in now. I did confirm. He goes, now. Okay. So I told the platoon sergeant, hey, you keep going. We've cleared to this point. I'll run back. So I ran back. And I get back into the headquarters and he looks at me and goes, what the hell are you doing here? I told you to go and clear this hill. I said, you just called me on the radio. He goes, no, I didn't. And then one of the other platoon commanders who'd been there obviously said, hey, sir, that you did. Definitely. It was on company command. He asked you twice. So, again, it's completely understandable just with the confusion that's starting to reign, with regard to where call signs are and who's where and doing what.
Yeah.
So I get told, get back out there and sort it out. So they got to
run back. Yeah.
To catch up with the guys, and I got there just before.
Where was your call sign in reference to how far do you reckon you ran?
About halfway.
Yeah,
so about halfway. So I had a good. I was a bit fitter in those days.
Yeah.
So I'm running back with body armor, then running back again to catch up to them, And then we sort of got to the area where the FUP was, secured our way in there, and I still remember, so that you can hear the firing now. Like we're close. We're within hundreds of metres by this stage. Like we've closed the gap significantly. There's a hill in front of us, and we've got the FUP sort of behind it, where we can have as much security as possible.
Yeah. And
we're going to probably go at a 45-degree angle over the top of this hill, and then up onto that next feature to clear it. I've got, I think it was 7 platoon from memory in the low ground. The then Lieutenant, now Colonel Brett Grant, sort of in the low ground with his guys, providing some support from there. But we knew at a point that'd have to cut out as we sort of exposed ourselves and went. So I just recall looking at the sections and giving the order, 2 up, 1 back. And I figured, look, where the militia were at that point in time, the hill directly behind them, the border was behind that. And we couldn't see the other end of the hill, obviously, right? So I don't know if they got reinforcements, are they dug in? Like you're not quite sure.
Yeah.
So I just said, fix bayonets. And I just recall the soldiers sort of looking at me. I said, we don't know what's ahead of us, right? 2 up, 1 back, fix bayonets, let's go. And I pulled mine out and fixed it. And you could sort of see it just, everyone, there was a degree of resolve, right? It's the power of that. It's a, I suppose with regard to bayonets, we use it for combat behaviours, but it's also that bit about, it's an element around your own resolve for what you might have to deal with in close combat. And it's resolve for you, but it's also letting your enemy know that that's the length we're willing to go to get to this if we need to. So we did that, shot the bearing, and then, gave the radio call, we're off. And so we stepped off. Now, as we'd gone around, what they'd started to do was infill unarmed civilians in and amongst their positions so that we couldn't sporadically fire in there for fear of hitting a local. But when they saw us come over the hill and start to close with that position, they went. And what was clear to us, so that they exfilled off the hill. So we obviously got to a point where we then started pepper potting, like, dry fire and moving in case they were on the other side. So we went up and over the crest, and then you could see they'd cached vehicles. So they took the weapons down, cached vehicles, and they got back in the vehicles and headed over the border. And we could only assume they took the civilians with them because there was no one there. But they'd left behind a stock of ammunition. They were, so high-grain lapware, et cetera. So, we sort of cleared them off the hill and then went down, reorged, moved off the position, went back to company, and then the company continued on with a coordinate search from there. But it certainly had the effect of clearing that area. And as I understand it afterwards, there was a lot less militia activity because we sort of demonstrated that will. They tested our reaction, and we demonstrated the will to come out and deal with that. And the company then went into a period of laying out ambushes overnight just in case, but it was all quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah. I think that's Major Warnock also spoke about that, the testing, like to see how far the Australians would go.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And obviously we went from a cordon search to a deliberate clearance task of bayonets back to a cordon search, and then subsequently, I suppose, just to add another tactical task on, we're talking about control points and then going back to what your CO was trying to instill in you before you left, because he had the indications that you're going to Timor. Yep. Let's push onto the border and then checkpoints right on the border now. So we're getting closer and closer now. We're right on the border.
We're right on. So, So we get the next task we get out of Maliana is to pick up and move into the Akusi Enclave. So if you're familiar with the map with regard to East Timor, it's the bit of East Timor that's surrounded by West Timor and the sea. So it is literally an enclave out on its own. And so this thing obviously been surrounded on all sides. Militia had run riot in this place, and there was an element from 5-7RR, I'm aware, came in for a period of time, and then 3RR got sent in there as a battalion group to then secure the entire of the enclave. So companies were set out to different parts of the border. So we were sent out to a place referred to as Bobomeddo at that point in time, and so the MSR from the capital of Akusi ran through Bobomeddo off to Kefamananu in West Timor. So that road was a key route, and so we had much more traffic through that border post than others did. They'd set up markets around it. There'd be lots of movement east to west. So there was an Indonesian border post on the other side of that area, and then we had a mirror position there to try and maintain a degree of law, order, and security. So where this was, so the company was based out of, again, another mayor's sort of house as its patrol base. We had platoons split in different areas. There's a platoon co-located with company headquarters, a second call sign in that area that would look after the border. The first call sign that was with the platoon headquarters would do local patrolling down to the village of Mahata around Bob Meadow and the other areas. And then we had another platoon down at Bakui, which was down the MSR, sort of a midway point back to Akusi, so that we could keep the MSR open and then ensure nothing was going on in that middle ground either, was the way that we were sort of there. And that mirror position on the border, it was purely there because it needed to be for security. I mean, tactically, it's not a position you want to be in. I recall one side of the road sort of dropped into a ravine, so it was very steep, so it wasn't trafficable by foot. It was quite dangerous to go off that side of the road. The other side, you had a small area of flat open, more open terrain, but there's some jungle in there that's almost primary. So you only probably had 50 metres of visibility in some of these areas. There was a small hill behind the position, and there was an old Portuguese border post that had been raised. So the sign was there, so like a mud brick sort of sign, and it almost looked like a bit of a spire and the slab, but there was no hut there anymore. So what we did was we sort of had a section down there, half the section forward near where that post was to provide initial security, and half in overwatch on top of the hill, a couple of 100 metres behind that could see down into the post itself. So that's how we set that position up. And then the rest of your platoon would be back at the company patrol base, which is probably about 750 metres away, but by a winding road. But the road to the border itself probably had about 400 metres of straight stretch there.
It's this big fire lane.
It's a fire lane, right? As you come around the hill where we had the half section on top, you've got hundreds of metres on our side and on their side where it's just a fire lane. So any vehicle coming down, like you could interdict by firing straight down that road.
Yeah. So you've manned this a checkpoint, and you're sitting there. You've got as best you can with the terrain. Noting we talked about falling off on one side of the track and then at high ground on the other. Subsequently, did you have any sort of issues with the population that was on the other side? We're talking about you're right on the border now. So you would see Indonesians.
So there were lots. I mean, we were trying to maintain security, and again, so they'd have reunion meetings in this area. So families that were split by the border, obviously they got history, would come to meet. There'd be trade. People would go either way. Again, we were trying to ensure there wasn't proliferation of weapons or nothing was going on. And again, there were obviously militia had retreated back over the border, so we're trying to look out for signs of them coming back by the MSR. And generally, the locals were pretty good at letting us know who was a threat. So again, we were there for all of those sorts of reasons. The Indonesians up on the post had a sign for landmines. And I recall when we got there, that was pretty concerning. We're like, are there actually landmines? And they said, and I remember them saying through interpreters, no, we've just got that there to keep the populace on the road, so there shouldn't be landmines. I'm like, what does shouldn't be mean?
Yeah.
So we were trying to be sort of careful about, oh dear, like we can't see any signs that there are any there. It was just a sign. There wasn't anything else marked, but we were very careful about moving forward in and around that post as a result. So that was there was a conversation point, and it probably led to one of these incidents or the circumstances around it led to the incident. So we had a changeover of CO, and our new CO, so Nick Welsh went out and Peter Singh came in, and our new CO, Peter Singh, had come forward to see this post because there were big numbers coming through, and he was visiting every company locality. So obviously when he comes up, the company commander joins him, and there's a very large entourage of Australians that then move forward to have a look at this border. So I'm rearwards at the company headquarters. I've got a section forward, and interestingly enough, the section commander on task that day was a fellow by the name of Corporal Sean Casey, later an RSM, both of an RAR battalion and a brigade. And he had been promoted the day before from Lance Corporal and came to me, and it was his first day on the job as a full track. He'd come out of recon, if I remember correctly, and he was forward with us on the border that day. It was just the rotation, just how it was. So we had a posting cycle on ops, and we literally had people come in partway through, and it was all of those things that happened because we didn't know how long we'd be over there, right?
Yeah.
When we deployed, there was no, you'll be back, it'll be 6 months, it'll be 8 months, it'll be a year. We didn't know. They said, so the only thing I remember us being told was it won't be any longer than Vietnam. Well, that's a year, great. So we didn't find out for quite some time. So that was decided the posting cycle would go ahead, and so people went out and people came in, and famously people might know that was the class out of RMC that did their infantry ROBC early as second lieutenants and then deployed into East Timor and joined us partway through the tour. So there had been some disquiet from the locals that morning, and I actually received a radio call from the forward section that was indicating that the locals were really nervous about two particular individuals, and I'm just, I told them to maintain overwatch, see if they could engage the locals, work out what was going on. And there was a series of calls over the morning. And what started to be articulated was the fact that these two individuals were senior members of the militia in the enclave. Now, we got these sorts of reports all the time. Sometimes they were accurate. Sometimes it was people settling scores. Sometimes it was just someone that looked like someone else. So you had to be careful of the veracity of these, and we had tests for, what you act on. But at a point in time, I get a call from the section commander who says, There's a local that's been encouraged to come and talk to us by other locals. He's indicating these two were involved in murders, and he knows because he was an eyewitness and he's willing to make a statement. Now, that completely changes the game, because in accordance with our ROE, there's now reasonable suspicion so we can effect an arrest. So I indicated to him, look, if they come over the border, you're permitted to detain them, and we'll hand them over through the system to the UN police who can deal with it. We need to get this guy's details, see if he's willing to make a statement. So we did all of that, and the local came back to CHQ. At the same time, the CO arrives, and this huge entourage goes forward. So the locals are all nervous about these two guys. They're hanging around the border, but very wary of it. And then the CO goes forward, right? And there's this gaggle of people that then follow down with the CO because he's got an entourage with him. The IO's there, he's got personal protection, the RSM's there, they all head down to talk about this mine marker. And the way that it plays out, and I obviously got this secondhand because I wasn't on scene at the time, but as everyone gets around the mine marker, which is right up on the border, so it's got two signs either side of it, and it's, Selamat Datang di Indonesia, so it's like, welcome to Indonesia on the sign. Yeah. They're all just inside East Timorese territory talking about this mine marker with the Indonesian post commander, when these two guys who are now suspected, militia members that are accused of murdering people, they're trying to listen to what's going on, and they kind of lose their bearings a little bit and cross the border. So Corporal Casey and his guys were right on it. And so they very quietly moved two soldiers behind these guys between them and the border. And then he approaches them to say, gentlemen, I need you to come with me. We have reason to believe you may be militia. Now, the point where they realise he's approaching them, they turn to run, and of course there are soldiers behind them now between them and the border. So a fist fight ensues a couple of metres inside East Timor. And the situation deteriorates very quickly from there. Very quickly. So we're trying to, you imagine the Indonesian post commander's there just on his side of the border, and he'd been on ours. Suddenly these guys are trying to quell two blokes who are fighting to try and get to the other side. Yeah. We're trying to detain them, and the locals are running everywhere. The Indonesians are obviously quite animated and agitated by what's going on, so they're running security personnel forward. The CO's there, they're trying to get him out of there. So the next minute, I didn't know this had occurred until I got a call from the company commander saying, situation's evolved very quickly here. Two people are being detained. It's getting unstable. I need you to come forward and take command now. So I get in Land Rovers, off we go down. We see the CO come the other way. The company commander just yells at me from his Land Rover, we'll back you up, get up there and just make sure it's secure, right? Okay. So I don't know quite what I'm driving into.
Yeah.
And as we go, I can see these two guys. So we're coming up that fire lane as I described, and I can see the TNI deploying on their side of the border, and I can see a belt-fed machine gun being run across the road. So I've got a fair indication that things have heated up. And I can see these two guys now being detained behind the border post sign. They've been restrained. They've been searched. And as we get up there and that machine gun's got across, we quickly load the guys, get them in the vehicle, and I told the driver, turn around and go, because there's a fire lane, right?
Yep.
And if it goes badly now, you're in a Land Rover, that's not going to go well. So these guys have been backloaded. And so
you've jumped out, both of the detainees have jumped in,
correct.
Like thrown into the back of this Land Rover.
I just said,
go.
Yep. He's got to make a very swift 3-point turn.
Yeah.
And suddenly I'm behind the border post sign with Corporal Casey, who's 4 or 5 hours into being a section commander. And I said, what's going on? He's going, it's all gone bad, sir, which I can now see. And sort of the TNI.
Hands it over to you?
Well, no, he'd done a really good job of them. Like they rather appropriately got behind cover, but we've now got soldiers at a range of 7, 8, 9 metres pointing weapons at each other and yelling, and the Indonesians indicating they want these two guys back, which isn't happening because they've been arrested inside East Timorese territory, and there's reasonable suspicion to believe that they've been involved in murders. And so, that situation's deteriorating rather quickly. We've got some unmos that are forward. They're quite nervous about what's occurred with the situation, and, that position's being reinforced. Now, one of the other things on this day was we actually had a sniper team detached in this area, and they were in Overwatch on another hill, so that they are providing reports, and I'm getting these in through the earpiece, and I can hear that there's mass movement in the undergrowth. There's other people moving around to reinforce the border position on the other side. So it's not a good circumstance. We're outnumbered, and the position, as I said, tactically is not well laid out. You're there as a mirror post. So things are getting a bit ordinary. And I'm concerned now because we've arrested these two guys, but in accordance with our ROE, our soldiers having weapons pointed at them like that is a breach immediately, right? So in accordance with the ROE, you could have legitimately opened fire. But at that range, it's now mutually assured destruction. And again, It's not appropriate. Look, we don't need that to happen. We've arrested the 2 people that we believe are militia members and are accused of murdering people. There's nothing to be gained here. In fact, quite the opposite. It's a risk to mission, because what we don't want is to come to blows with our friends, right? Like any friendship, it goes through difficult periods. We don't need to be in a negative situation with the Indonesians on this. So quickly trying to sum the situation up, I said to Corporal Casey, right, I think our only way through this is for me to go and talk to them. And he said to me, you can't step out there. I said, well, I need to, because nothing's surer than if I stay here, this risks deteriorating. And if a shot's fired, that's it. So I said to him, what you need to, I just need you to keep providing that overwatch and cover. Like, keep your weapons trained on people. And if anything happens, if the shooting starts, I need the guys at the top of the hill who had 40 mil and a 66. I need you to deal with a medium machine gun and then just lay down some fire. And if any of us are left here on the border, we'll conduct a fighting withdrawal back to your position on the hill and try and get rearwards, and you get a hold of company and we'll get what support we can. Because it wasn't looking good. And in fact, so I got to the stage where I thought, no, I've got to step out. And I took the deliberate decision, and he sort of said to me, sir, you can't step out there. I said, hey, I need to. And he was trying to argue with me about it. And he was trying to look after my own welfare, I think. But I'd made the assessment at this point in time. I said, hey, Corporal Casey, it's not a conversation. This is what we're doing, okay? Right? You got this. And he was doing a great job. So I stepped out from behind the sign, and what I hadn't said to anyone at the time was, well, I decided in my own mind the only way to do this is to talk our way out. So I deliberately put my weapon down on the ground. Well, there was no one there at the time, you can imagine. The locals have left at speed, seeing what's going on. So I put my weapon down deliberately where they could see that I'd done that, because I was trying to make the point that I'm here to talk. So I walked up to the border and I said, hey, this is not okay. We need to talk about this. This is unacceptable. So there was a Malaysian UNMO, a fellow by the name of Major Muslan, and I'm eternally grateful to this guy. Like, he was unbelievably brave in this situation, and he interpreted for us to try and work through it. The situation was pretty bad. So there were 3 UNMOs there.
Sorry, so UNMO being a UN military observer.
Yep. And 2 of them got in the car and left for their own safety. And Major Muslan undertook the decision to stay and try and help the mission. So, I mean, if he's out there somewhere, sir, hats off to you. I'm eternally grateful. So, I mean, this evolved over a period of hours, and it just kept deteriorating. Like, the tension out there was palpable. You cut it with a knife, and we finally got to the point where I said, look, this is unacceptable. You're well aware this is a breach of our ROE. I'm getting to the stage where I am not willing to continue to accept this risk to my soldiers. I'm going to ask you to lower your weapons. We need to walk away from this situation. If that's not the case, we're getting to the stage where I'm going to have to issue the order to open fire. And so the Malaysian UNMO just looks at me. Well, I mean, it was pretty tense. I mean, I had 2 soldiers sort of covering me from the other side of the border, and I pretty much had those weapons in my stomach. So I've got to tell you, I'm being honest, and I'm still at the stage in my career where, I mean, I've probably got an uneasy truce with this situation in my life. I've never quite made peace with it. But I reconciled as I walked out there, this might be my last day on earth, right? That I might be able to buy some time for soldiers, and hopefully we'll be able to diffuse it. But it wasn't good, right? So when I'm telling you, when I said it wasn't a good situation, I was expecting that I might not see the end of this. So I walked out in the middle, and this is what I said to him. Just got to the stage where I was concerned that somebody was going to miscalculate. And I couldn't keep asking my soldiers to just sit there and wait for a shot to ring out and lose somebody. So I told the UNMO, I said, sir, you need to interpret, please. They need to understand where we're at, right? So he said, are you sure? I said, sir, this can't go on. Like, you need to tell him, right? We need to try and avoid this escalating. So, and again, great credit to the Indonesian post commander, if I remember correctly, Sergeant Sukiano. Again, a really brave man who took the decision at that point in time to tell his soldiers to lower their weapons and de-escalate it. And I could see that there was one particular NCO who didn't take kindly to any of this. And at that moment, when something's about to go wrong, it all goes into slow motion. I can just see him out of the corner of my eye, because he wasn't that far away, start swinging his weapon around in my direction. And as I look across, I'm like, oh my God, he's about to shoot me. Like, he's literally, that's what's going through my head. I'm just waiting to hear a bang, either side. Either one of our guys shoots him or he shoots me, and, it's on. And unbelievably, two of the soldiers on that side of the border crash tackled their own NCO to stop it. So you can imagine, it's just bedlam. And at that point in time, there's yelling going both ways. I've gone and recovered my rifle, because that's where we're probably at. And I had the guy say, what do we do? I said, we need to stay here now, because what we've got is, we've got a degree of the moral high ground, and we just need to maintain security. So we're we're trying to report back, and my SIG's on top of the hill. I sent him up on top of the hill, so I'm trying to relay through the pintail to say, hey, this is what's going on. You need to tell company. And the snipers come in and go, hey, boss, mass movement, maybe 30, 35 personnel armed coming down the hill. And the next minute, a fellow by the name of Moko Suarez, who was the militia leader in that area, comes down the hill and makes himself known, and could speak English, and was telling me that he was going to kill me. And so I sort of stayed there, and I indicated that he was welcome to cross the border if he'd like. He was pretty high on our HVT list at the time.
Yeah,
he certainly didn't do that, but the situation was by then absolutely untenable, because there were, the 35 or more militia, snipers are looking in on that side. And so we got back to the company commander, who sent elements forward to reinforce. So after that, it very slowly started to de-escalate. It led to the exclusion zone on the border. So we both ended up not having permanent positions there and pulling them back. And we got rotated out for a period of time, obviously, because it was pretty hero-raising day. So we needed to take a little bit of stock and come off the border and take the heat out of it and just work through it with the soldiers. What I would say is this, and this is something that I've stewed over for sort of 25 years. That day has lived very large in my memory, and there are only, so a section, a platoon SIG, a platoon commander, and 2 snipers that were forward and saw this play out. In my 30 years of service, I don't know I've ever seen anything braver than what those soldiers did on that day. The willing acceptance to sit there and accept risk personally for the good of the mission. To understand that restraint here, which was the harder thing to do, right? Because you everything you've been taught about retention of the initiative, everything you've been taught, your ROE's telling you, hey, if I don't shoot and someone else shoots first, like I might be dead. This is really difficult stuff. The level of professionalism, the level of restraint, the trust, the discipline those men showed. You know what? I've seen a lot of things in 30 years. I don't know I've ever seen personally anything braver than that. And for me, that story's not been told, and these soldiers deserve an unbelievable amount of credit for what they did, because we were dealing with a situation at the time, but you can only imagine the effect on the mission had that gone wrong.
Yeah.
Now, we only found out secondhand later, and I understand that those 2 individuals were convicted. And that's just, again, second or third hand. But what they did and the way they handled that was just phenomenal. And I would love them to know later on down the track, and I try to tell them at the time, but over time when you look back at it, I'm just so enormously proud of them, and so proud to have been associated with soldiers who acted in that manner. Who had such faith in what they were doing that they would show that discipline and work for the mission, putting themselves at risk. And that's what the Army's about, right? We're about people, but we're a mission-first organisation at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I saw that play out.
And they understood that as well at that.
Oh, I reckon they did at some level. I really do. It was incredible. And again, I felt as secure in the knowledge as I could, because I trusted these guys literally with my life to do their job.
Yep. Whatever
came, that I knew I couldn't have asked for any better backup at the time. They deserve great credit. That story deserves to be told. They deserve to be lauded for what they did, because they did it in the middle of nowhere, out of the eyes of anyone.
Outnumbered.
And they did it for all of the right reasons and for the mission. And I couldn't be prouder of them. And I hope that they are proud of themselves.
Yeah. I suppose the sort of somewhat of an elephant in the room is you go back to pick up your rifle, but Corporal Casey is there.
Yep.
When you get time to sit down and genuinely hot wash with your crew, what does Corporal Casey say to the then platoon commander?
So there were sort of 2 parts to this. So the first part was that night, and I've got to say, look, I have so much respect for him as a human, as an NCO, later as an RSM. What a first day! He handled it magnificently. You'd have thought he was doing it from day dot. He was just fantastic in the circumstance. The point where I said, hey, this is what we're doing, he was 100% invested, and I couldn't have asked for any more. The enormity of what occurred sort of didn't hit us till later that night. And I'd go back and look at my patrol notes, and they're just so matter of fact. There's no emotion in them whatsoever.
Just completely descriptive.
He and I sort of sat there, just the 2 of us, going back through trying to annotate it. And he just looked at me and he said, God, it's not like that every day, is it? I said, no, it's out of the box. I've never seen that. And he just looked at me and went, oh, thank God. I said, no, it's not like that every day. I can tell you. He said, I think that was pretty close. And I said, oh, I don't know that it's got closer. And it wasn't until he sort of left. We were in, by that stage, I think we got 11 by 11 tents. We'd upgraded from sleeping under hoodgies. And we were having a brew and he walked out of my tent. It wasn't until after that I sort of, in going back through the notes and thinking about it and sitting there on my own, I could see my hands shaking as the enormity of the whole thing sort of hit you. But you didn't have time to sit there and dwell on it because then the next day it's the next thing. So that was the reality of it, right? So this is the complexity of trying to deal with it. And, you know, I've probably spent 25 years trying to understand the full impacts and effects, and I've lived with some of those for a period of time. As you know, the next day we're off patrolling and doing something else. That was the reality of it. So you didn't sort of have that time to sit and have that conversation. It was, what's the next thing?
I think that hot wash obviously doesn't happen at the time. You genuinely don't have time because then the next sort of series of events is that the mayor's daughter is taken.
Yeah, correct.
So you've moved back. You've moved off the border after being threatened by this high value target that was being sought by SSR and a number of other organisations. You move back in and you get reports that the mayor's daughter has been taken.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that I was persona non grata, right? So we went down to the sort of middle post area and we ended up having to have a chat to the platoon about the whole weapon thing. So the guys really bound up about the fact that I'd put down my weapon.
Yeah.
Well, we're always taught, weapon security and you shouldn't do that. I said, yeah, we are. I made an assessment at the time and I thought that talking a way out was the only way. So we had to sit down and talk about it. And I said, hey, look, maybe I just missed it when I was going through RMC, but I don't remember the manual of land warfare that covered negotiations under border incidents.
Yeah.
So I just made the best decision that I could, and I figured that talking a way out was probably the only way it could go. And I said, I can't tell you whether or not it was right or wrong other than the fact that we're still here. We kept the detainees and we're alive and they're alive, so it must have been okay. And sort of after we talked about it, they were okay with it. They could understand where the logic thread was going and we were sort of okay. So then we get rotated back up the top of the hill and we're on the local patrol task, and all of a sudden there's a huge commotion and the mayor of the town running back down, and there's a lot of upset going on, and we find out that militia have come over the border and they've grabbed his young daughter. I think she was only about 7 or 8 years old, and they're trying to make back over the border with her. And so we get reacted immediately, go. So we just get a last step. They were last at this position, and we've reacted the platoon. And at this stage, because of some of the situations that we'd faced, the platoon's on the highest risk task. We used to have company guns in the company then. There used to be an old support section, so those Mag 58s were given out. We only had 2. So I had a gun team in my platoon headquarters, so they came with me and we went as a call sign. So we went to last known position in militia, and as we got there, we probably saved a few of them because the locals had grabbed 2 or 3 of them. And they were about to sort it out their own way when we arrived, and I had to leave a section there to stop the locals from, dispensing justice as they would put it on the spot. That was not okay. So we grabbed those guys, searched them, got the locals off, and we continued. And we're just trying to get a feel out of the locals. We had interpreters with us for where these guys had gone. And by this stage, we'd been on the border. We knew where the routes were, and they weren't going to cut their way through jungle. They were going to take tracks. But then there's danger in that, right? So if you're following a known path behind people that are armed, that have this young girl, what are you going to do? So we figured out where they might be, and then we tried to vector the 2 sections, one around and cut off to check one area and us going the other way. And we process of elimination, we work out what track we think they're using, and we've got to cut them off. And I need another call sign to get in and provide a block so we can try and stop them. And of course, there's Murphy's Law, right? So, any incident will happen on the scene of 4 maps, and when you don't need it, your radio is going to drop its fills. And we were carrying the amazing Pintail, for those of you old enough to remember, the amazing fill dropping radio, and it didn't let me down like fills went. And so we are adjacent to the border trying to chase guys that are armed, and all of a sudden it's not encrypted. It's not encrypted. We're in plane because it gave you a sound when that happened. And I'm like, oh no, this is not okay, because if we've got a call for cutoff, we're going to tell people exactly where we're putting troops and then exactly where we're coming from. And if anyone can listen in, like we're at risk of being ambushed here. And for whatever reason, we didn't have ops and numeral codes. Right, so I remember sitting through doing that as a cadet, trying to work out how to use those. Now, to be fair, probably would have taken me 3 hours to work that out anyway in the good old days. For anyone that's done that, there's some SIGs that are very good at it. I was not a SIG that was very good at it. So I'm now trying to work out quickly, how the hell do I do this in plane? How do I get people where I need them in plane, right? And time's ticking, and they got a lead on us. And it came to me that one of the SIGs, Private Simpson, and I used to talk football. So I'm a Melbourne Demons tragic, and he was a Demons supporter as well. And Simo and I, when we had downtime, have a chat, kick a footy around. We got a footy by that point in time. It was sort of, a thing you could do to relax. And when he's a Melbourne supporter, I can do this in player numbers. So I get on the radio quickly and I get onto the CP and I say, hey, fetch, it's call sign Simpson on duty. Negative. I said, fetch. And the det commander's like, oh, no, he's off shift. I said, fetch him now. I need him now. Go get him. So they worked out something urgent was going on. They went and got Simo, and he gets on the radio and says, call sign Simpson. And I said to him, hey, call sign Simpson, 733. How are your player numbers over? And you get sort of, say again your last. I said, your player numbers for the team we support, do you know them? And there was silence in that, yes, over. I said, prepare to copy. And I'd sort of worked it out. And I don't recall the grid reference number for number, but I said to him, I require cutoff at grid, Gary Lyon, Jim Steins, Sean White, and I gave it to him in Melbourne. And so he's at the other end madly working out, Melbourne players to get the numbers, right? So 3, 11, 27. And that's how we did it. And so he, thank goodness, he was all over it.
Yeah.
Or at least he knew them like I thought I knew them. So we got the same numbers out.
And did he read back in the players? He
read back in players.
Yeah,
I confirm, reads back in players. So we figured, unless there's a Melbourne supporter listening, we're okay.
And you've got it's quick.
It's quick, it's expedient.
Yeah.
So we get cut off in place, and we were right, and we got the mayor's daughter back. And it just, again, it's hard not to get emotional like that young girl, like seeing that young girl, like it was one of the other sections that caught up with them and got her, and seeing her and her father reunited, and you're like, you want to talk about best days in Army? That's the best day in Army moment, right?
Yeah.
Where it went right. And that's one of the biggest things I take out of all of this, right? You talk about lessons as a young platoon man. Geez, I got a lot wrong. I got a lot wrong, right? I was raw. I was inexperienced. I made mistakes. You'd like to apologise to your first lot of soldiers and section commanders. You didn't always get it right. But some of those big things we've talked about today, you got right enough. And that's all you need to do. You just need to learn, and you just need to lead, and you'll get there, right? And we all learn from that. And I just, that was one of those moments where you got it right enough on the day to make a difference.
Yeah.
And that was really, really key. But I had forgotten about that story. So we get back to Australia, and Simo, who tells his family, because they're all Melbourne supporters, his mother tells the club, because she's in the cheer squad, I think.
And, they are diehard fans. So
serious diehard fans. So he tells me, he goes, hey, we've been invited to go toss the coin, and I don't know where I was, but I couldn't do it. So he gets to go out in Polly's and toss the coin. I think it was Melbourne versus North, a night game. And they kind of told a bit of the story, and he tossed the coin, which is just awesome. And I'd forgotten about it. And then when I went to the reunion last year in Townsville for the 25th, one of the guys who he transferred from infantry to SIG goes, hey, sir, hey, you gave that grid in Melbourne jumper numbers, didn't you? And I'd forgotten. I said, yeah. He goes, well, I went to SIGs. I tell that story on a course. He said, I was down at Watsonia and I was telling that story, and a young captain down there said, well, that's rubbish. That would have never happened. He goes, did happen, because, I know the det commander and I knew the guy that did. And he goes, well, it's not very secure and that'd never occur. So, open advertisement for that captain. You will, and made it occur. So that good sergeant was telling you the truth, because it occurred. I'm not saying it's what you should do, but sometimes you just got to get creative, because we just didn't have codes. And whether or not I don't recall why, but guaranteed that piece of equipment goes down when you don't need it to, and you just had to find a solution. I was very lucky that football was a common thread for us.
Yeah, and you knew him well enough as well. I suppose, going back to your point about these key takeaways or the big messages out of it, if we come back a number of amazing experiences, flipping from tactical task to tactical task and trying to learn on the fly and stuff, what are your key sort of takeaways from your time as a platoon commander in Timor?
So there's a few things that come to it. So the first one is you've heard the Chief of Army say on several occasions, you've got to be ready to fight tonight. Yeah, we did. There wasn't any mission rehearsal. The CO had done some work with us on exercise because he understood that something was coming, right? But, if I look at my circumstance, I didn't have a platoon yet. So I saw it play out, but from the CP, right, I wasn't involved in that. So I've been a platoon commander for 2 weeks. We talked about bump drills. You just got to go with what you got, right? So what I'd say to the young officers out there is, hey, you'll be raw and you'll be inexperienced, but our Army has an exceptional training system. Your training is world-class. You are ready. You don't have all the answers. You won't get it right. You need to listen and you need to learn, but you have got what it takes. That's why you've got to where you are. So just go forward, have faith in yourself and lead and work with those around you and trust in that. And I'd say the same thing to the NCOs. Again, our system's exceptional. I saw it. I saw a Lance Corporal promoted to Corporal put into one of the worst situations you ever want to see, and he was magnificent. Day one, straight off the bat. I didn't get a choice. He was there. He just had to be. And he couldn't have played it any better. So, I've seen it play out. So have faith in that. I've lived, I suppose, my leadership journey aligned to John C. Maxwell's quote that the best leaders know the way, go the way, show the way. And that's something that I saw while I was at the Defence Force Academy, and it resonated with me, and it was reinforced by this experience. So know the way. You've got to be tactically and technically competent and work every day to get to where you need to be. You won't always be there. You've got to keep working at that. You've got to go the way. So it's about credibility. It's about earning it in training, but also then proving yourself when you're out on the task. It's about the credibility of doing what you need to do. And when they have that trust in that credibility, people will follow you because they know that you're technically competent, you're tactically competent. And then leadership is about showing the way. It's about example. It's about setting the bar, being relentless in doing that. It's not do as I say. It's do as I say and do. Of course it's do as I say because you need to be able to give orders at a point, but they've then got to know that you're willing to carry them out. And I go back to that line about don't ask a soldier to do what you wouldn't yourself. And when they see you and what you would do, that they will follow that example, as I have done with my leaders, as I did with my first CO who was, Colonel Welsh, who just, he set a standard for us to follow when we were over there. There was no question around that. So you model yourselves on those behaviours. And that requires, at times, it's leadership, it's example, it's inspiration, it's mentoring, it's counselling. Sometimes it's dragging people to the objective if that's what's required, and you learn over time with judgment which of those. So go, show and know the way and get yourself as prepared as you can because you just don't know when.
That is an absolutely awesome point to leave the episode on to. Thank you so much for all of your insight into Timor. It's been absolutely awesome.
Hey, it's been a privilege to be here and chat. And as I say, for me, I'm obviously very proud to have been in that battalion on that operation at that time. We've just gone through the 25th anniversary, and I am privileged to have been surrounded by such a wonderful group of soldiers and officers in that unit. But I would particularly dedicate this to the men of 9 Platoon Charlie Company. I would never have realised that I would be as privileged to deploy with as fine a group of soldiers, and it's an honour to have shared that experience with them, and I thank each and every one of them for what they gave and for the time they invested in a very young officer trying to find his way as well. I couldn't be prouder of them.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.